I'd like to state for the record that I did not plan this. It's like a happy little accident, like Bob Ross would say, but I swear this was not planned. This episode that you are about to listen to marks 3 milestones. This is the 50th episode of Solving for the Undefined Podcast. Woo-woo! It also happens to be the 2-year anniversary of the show. And to top it all off, this episode goes live on my birthday. Talk about the perfect trifecta. I could not have planned it better. To celebrate today's epic episode, I'm going to be sharing 3 things I wish I could go back and tell my first year teacher self. So with that, let's get started. Welcome to Solving for the Undefined Podcast. I'm your host, Johanna, founder of Miss Kuiper's Classroom, the place that equips teachers in creating a healthy math classroom where students can thrive, no matter their academic abilities. But it's not always about the numbers, and that's why I'm here, bringing you the formulas to solve your problems, math and otherwise, plus strategies on cultivating that necessary math mindset. And that's what you can count on. Hello, welcome to the 50th episode of Solving for the Undefined Podcast. In today's episode, I'm going to be taking you down memory lane with me, thinking about my first year as a math teacher. And if I could go back knowing what I know now, what would I tell my first year teacher self to set myself up even further for success teaching? So, I came up with 3 things as I was thinking, and the number one thing I thought of when I looked back was how much time I spent in the classroom. Especially past contract hours, I spent late nights, I spent weekends, I spent days off planning lessons. And while I think that helps set you up for years to come, it is not necessarily the best use of time. And I could have used that time to plan better activities or worked on building relationships, classroom community. There are more things to the classroom than just the lessons itself. And one of the biggest reasons why I felt I had to spend all of this time outside of school planning was because the curriculum we had sucked. It was terrible. And one of the main reasons why it was so atrocious was it assumed so much of students without setting students up to actually be successful in the activities. We had a Pythagorean theorem unit in there, and the discovery activity that it had, while itself, the idea of it was really good, the execution of it, not so great. All of that to say is one thing that I'd go back and tell myself is while the curriculum still sucked, I could still use it. And one of those ways is to take those discovery lessons and those problems and make them into thin sliced problems. Meaning that I would take them, I would chop them into each section and have students work on one at a time. When students are faced with these big tasks, especially a discovery-based lesson, it can be overwhelming for students with all of the text, all of the ideas, all of the to-dos. So if you break it down into individual pieces, give them one piece at a time, and with that, have them working with a team or a partner, because more brains are better than one. Students can see it from multiple perspectives. That would have served them better than just trying to implement an individual discovery-based lesson. And with the thin slice problems, I would also institute rough draft thinking. If rough draft thinking is a new term to you, if you go back and listen to episode 49, I took a deep dive into what rough draft thinking is and how to use it in the math classroom. I would take the idea of rough draft thinking and implement it with these discovery-based lessons. I would also implement it with the practice problems. Now, the practice problems within the curriculum were really, really good, but there were a lot of them. And so when students would look at a page, they were overwhelmed by all of these word problems because it used more real life examples, which is awesome. it was also a lot on a single page. So implementing the idea of the thin sliced problems and the idea of rough draft thinking. And I might even implement the 3-read protocol, which is from a different curriculum. It has students read a problem 3 times and answer a question about it every time. So like the first one is basically, what do you notice about the problem? And the second is, what is our goal of the problem? And then the third one is, what information from the problem will help us for that goal? In really taking these discovery-based questions and these real-life word problems and having them seriously think through the problem before they get started. Because one of the main barriers that I find with students is they don't understand what the problem is truly asking them in order to solve the problem. Typically, students will take a guess at it and then just stick with it, but having them read through it and then take some time to just rough draft and guess and try something, then see an example or talk with a neighbor and then go back and edit their work, it seems like it would be more beneficial than just having them do problems 5 through 10 on a piece of paper or in your notebook. And then the last thing I'll say in regards to the curriculum might suck, but you can still use it, is make pieces of it into a game. And one that I really like to use in my classroom is called Math Lottery. So for each class period, you have a 100 chart, so like 1 through 100, and each time a student finishes a problem and checks in with you, they can initial off one of the boxes. And then at the end of class, once students have completed problems or the time is up, you would then draw randomly 3 of those numbers. And if students have initialed those places, those students earn a prize. The thinking behind doing something like Math Lottery for problems in a book is just to give students an external incentive to work through tough problems. They want the prize. They want to win. They want to take that risk, that gamble, and see, oh, maybe I can win the quote-unquote lottery. It's going to incentivize them more than just go ahead and complete problems 5 through 10. It's giving them something more. And actually, in next week's episode, we're going to have Brooklyn from Brooklyn's Brightest come on and tell us how to take worksheets and make them into games to help hook in and engage your students even further. So that's something to look forward to next week. And that's everything I would say about the curriculum might suck, but you can still use it, is thin slice the problems, institute rough draft thinking, and make pieces of it into a game. Now, the second major thing I would go back and tell myself would be stop doing traditional warm-ups. And when I say traditional warm-up, I'm thinking spiral review problems or problems that are from yesterday's learning, stuff like that. And the reason I'm saying this is because how often when you give a warm-up, math-based warm-up, how often does it take way longer than you ever anticipated it taking? My first year of teaching, that happened on a regular basis, so much so that I stopped doing warm-ups entirely and just went straight into taking notes. How boring does that sound? Just start class, sit down, be quiet, we're taking notes. That sounds awful. But that's what happens, is a warm-up can take so much longer than necessary because when it's a math problem, you have to go over it. And when students don't understand, it's really challenging to move past that without giving background or helping students truly understand it. I'm interrupting today's episode to ask you a vital question. Do you have the tools in your classroom for student success? Well, wonder no more, because I have a way for you to check your work. My new guide, 7 Math Teacher Must-Haves for Student Success, has the top 7 items you need in your classroom. From classroom staples to manipulatives that are often missed, this checklist will ensure that your students have a successful school year. Additionally, each item shows the best budget and splurge options. Download the 7 Math Teacher Must-Haves for Student Success after listening to today's episode by going to misskuiper.com/guide. And additionally, what if a kid was gone the day before when you taught this material? What are they supposed to do? Are they supposed to just sit there and wait for you? Or are they supposed to try it? What do you want from them? Especially if it's a brand new concept that they really truly don't know how to do yet. It creates such an awkward interaction that you have to have and come up with on the fly of like, oh, I guess you don't have to do it, or just try your best. So my suggestion is just to take it off the board and do something like a critical thinking task. Specifically, a critical thinking task like which one doesn't belong, estimation problems, crack the code, number riddles, things like that. And back in episode 44, I dive into more of those and explain why they are important and can be beneficial for students. I'll give you a quick synopsis here though. The reason why these can be more beneficial than your standard math problems as warm-ups is because, one, they're a lot more fun than just giving a math problem. They're asking students to still use math, but it has like a critical thinking and fun twist to it that's going to hook students in at the beginning of class, and they've given you their attention and their engagement, and it's going to sustain them throughout the entire class period. Whereas if you start off with a problem that students may or may not know how to do, some of them are engaged, some of them are hooked in, but majority might not be. It's setting yourself up for maybe more problems later on, especially in the classroom management side of things. So I like to start off the class with a critical thinking task that's fun, interactive, and is still math-based, but it's not the traditional math problem. And with this, because one of the major reasons why I stopped doing warm-ups back my first year of teaching was it took so much time to review it, and if students didn't understand, we had to talk about it more, and it just ate up our lesson time where students could be doing new math and new thinking. And in reality, if a kid doesn't get the crack the code answer, it's not the end of the world. Yes, it's important for them to use their thinking skills to work through all of the clues, but if a kid doesn't get the right answer, they've still put in the effort of trying, but it doesn't matter if they got it right or wrong. And you don't really have to go over that as in depth as you would a math problem. So you're saving yourself time. And when I implement these in my classroom now, we really do stick to about 5 to 7 minutes doing the problem and reviewing it. Then we get to move on. Easy peasy. So that's the second thing. Stop doing traditional warm-ups. Now, the third thing that I would tell myself is, you're going to think this is ironic, but introduce spiral review. Yes, spiral review is absolutely important to do within the classroom, just the warm-up is not the place for it. And where I would implement the spiral review is in the activities themselves. My first year of teaching, I treated math as a one and done, kids know it. So we would do a lesson, we'd do a unit, they'd take the test, they would show what they quote unquote knew, and then we'd move on, and it would introduce a new concept with the foundation of what we just learned, and kids would be like, we never learned this, or I don't know how to do this, what does it mean, square root? So yes, spiral review would help mitigate some of this. And where I would place the spiral review is within the activities that we do. So say we're doing a scavenger hunt and the topic is geometric transformations. Maybe a couple of those problems, maybe about 20% of those problems, would be spiral review from the unit before, which I guess could be integer operations or graphing linear equations. Having 1 or 2 problems of those just to keep it fresh in students' minds. So 80% of it is still stuff that students are currently learning, but that other 20% is things that they have previously learned. And plus, since you are doing it during team time or independent work time, you are more free to help students who struggled with those concepts. Whereas during a warm-up time, you're trying to get the class started, ready to go. Doing spiral review during the activity is going to help you target students who need that additional support. Another place that you could put spiral review is in homework. if you choose to give homework. I have an entire episode diving into homework, yay or nay. I believe it's episode 40. You can go back and listen to not only my opinions, but other teachers' opinions as well on whether homework has the proper place within the classroom / home and how we can make it more equitable for students. So if you give homework or you do the homework variation that I suggest within that episode, this would be the place for spiral review. This is giving students the opportunity to practice and self-check their understanding consistently to know whether or not, or know where they need to focus their practicing efforts. And then the last thing I would say about spiral review, or just practice in general, is don't overwhelm yourself or your students with the number of problems. Less will most likely, in most cases, be more. You want to focus on giving rich tasks rather than product-based questions. So the more you can get students to critically think about a problem, the more likely students are going to retain that and be able to actually extract learning from it than if you just gave them redundant type questions. And this idea goes for assessments too. I know so many teachers love the front and back type assessments. I would really suggest keeping it down to 2 or 3 problems because you can tell if a student knows something or not by a few problems rather than having to go through and grade 10. But that rant is for another day. So, if I could go back and tell myself when I was younger, I'd say, insert the Victoria's Secret song here. But if I could go back and tell myself as a first year teacher, I would say 1, the curriculum might suck, but here are some ways that you can still use it. 2, stop doing time-sucking traditional warm-ups. And 3, spiral review in the appropriate places. And as we wrap up today's 50th episode of Solving for the Undefined Podcast, I just truly, from my heart, I truly just wanted to say thank you so much for being part of this community. I have truly loved being the host of this podcast, and every time you send messages to me on Instagram saying positive things or how much it's helped you or you really enjoyed this or you can't wait to try this in your classroom, it means the world to me because I love sharing this stuff with you and it is nice to know that you enjoy it too. So thank you so much for being a listener of the Solving for the Undefined podcast. And in the coming days, because today is my birthday, if you head over to my Instagram, I have a couple of birthday celebrations to share with you, some freebies, some discounts, and I hope that it will be helpful for you in your classroom. So with that, I'll calculator. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. To find all the links and resources to things talked about in this episode, head on over to MissKuipersClassroom.com and click on podcast.